they go back and like write those at the computer.
That's awesome. That's really cool
Yeah.
to hear. That's really cool. So what has kind of crossed your mind as you have been seeing all of this go down and knowing that you wrote that back then?
It's been very weird. Like the first thought that I had was, I hope that nobody thinks that this virus is fake, because it's not. And I think that like I thought at the time that I wrote this play that it would require something like a virus to make us all only talk to each other on social media. And what I have learned, you know, in the past 10 years since I wrote it is that we were all going to start communicating on social media more than in person, even without somebody forcing us to do it. And I think that weirdly, social media has helped us feel more connected during all of this. I know that if I didn't have access to like my friends on Snapchat or texting people all the time or FaceTiming with people or being on Facebook, like I would feel much more isolated. So the play, I wrote it sort of as an indictment of social media and like something that was meant to be like, we need to take a step back from this and do less interacting on this platform. But in the context of our current situation, I think it's actually doing a lot of good because it's helping us feel like we at least have access to each other in some way. And I'll be really interested to see what happens when we can all see each other again, when social distancing kind of ends, if it will impact the way that we choose to gather either in a virtual space or a physical space going forward.
Awesome. All right. So I want to open up to questions now. If you have a question, either click like the raise your hand thing or Carter, I see you. Go ahead and unmute Carter and let's hear your question.
Hi. So how did you acquire this inspiration to write this play? I mean, I know you said that you quit Facebook for a month, but how did you acquire this inspiration to write the play? What?
Yeah. The actual idea of it, I think we had read Fahrenheit 451 a couple years previous in English at class, and so I was very into conspiracy theories and just sort of like ways that I really liked the Matrix movies and like this sort of like idea of a government that's not really telling you the truth. This was also during like the Bush presidency, so there was a lot of like, are there WMDs? Aren't there? Is our government lying to us? So like all those ideas were floating in my head, and then I was a sophomore in high school. And so when I wrote the first draft, and so the perspective of it needed to be on some level from like a high school girl, because that's the world that I knew. And then the world I didn't know, but sort of had as a fantasy in my head was this idea of a big governmental conspiracy. Oh, and there was a book too. It's a young adult fiction book called, I think, Running from Time. I'll Google it in a minute. That's about a girl that's raised in it's kind of like an Amish community. She's led to believe
Running out of time.
Running Out of Time. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know that. I know that book. Yeah, Running Out of Time.
Yeah, great book. And this girl, the protagonist, is tricked into believing that she is living in like the 1800s. And what she finds out is that's actually a simulation, and she escapes. So all those sort of influenced what I was thinking about and the kind of format that I chose and the characters that I came up with for this world.
Cool. Jace, I see you have a question. Go ahead and unmute and let us know.
Oh, okay. When you said Fahrenheit 451, I kind of freaked out a little bit, but anyway, so how long did it take you to write the full play and like publish it and everything?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because the play evolved a lot. So I wrote the first draft my sophomore year, and we did it, the production that Miss Morris was in was our One Act Festival that year. And at the time, I think it was maybe 30 to 40 pages shorter. It didn't have the ending that it has now. It kind of just ended with her talking about how it was a conversation with Samuel where she's just talking about how the world is kind of going to crap and she doesn't like to put her writing online. She doesn't want to put her new stuff in the place where the old stuff went to die. Like that was the ending scene of the play. And then after we did that performance, our high school theater teacher, Mrs. Hitchler, mentioned to me this competition the International Thespian Society hosted. And they selected like 4 winners every year from all the high schools across the country. And they got to have more development with the play with professional playwrights and cast it with people who were coming to the festival, and you did like a whole week-long workshop with them. So I won that and got to go to that festival in Nebraska that year. And I worked with Christopher Diaz, who is a Pulitzer Prize nominee. So kind of intimidating. At the time he wasn't, but he had written a few plays. His Pulitzer Prize nominated play is The Elaborate Entrance of Chad Deity, which is about professional wrestlers. So I highly recommend looking into that. But he kind of helped me build out the ending during that week in Nebraska. And that was the summer before my junior year. So we improvised the new ending with actors, and we basically had the actors that had already been cast in it play out a couple different scenarios that, like, how could this play end? And then I took the ones that I liked best and wrote the new ending where the walls come up and they hack into the system. So all the stuff with like Shrub and Drella at the end and Guitar Superstar being the backdoor into this world, that all happened after International Thespian Society Festival. So we came back, and then I started sending it around, just like more competitions. And it wasn't until my freshman year of college that we did it in New York at the Cherry Lane Theater, which is an off-Broadway theater, as part of a program called Young Playwrights Inc. Their Write a Play Festival. They did like another development series and workshop with it. And after that, I kind of just, it had been published in Dramatics Magazine, I think my junior year after International Thespian Society Festival. And then people just started doing it high schools, and I would get emails from like high school teachers, like their programs doing it. And sometimes I would find like photos of people who did it without licensing it and be like, hey, I can see you, you're on the internet. So that was kind of like how the development process of it went. And I don't know if the version that you guys read even has all of the stuff all of the edits we made after the New York reading. So the one that was published doesn't have all of the changes that the ones that you guys read has.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. And also, guys, your questions too can revolve around like being a playwright in general. Doesn't have to be strictly stuck to Self Story, the play itself. So does anyone have a question now? Amy Hastings, go for it.
Hi. So you just kind of briefly touched on this, but talk a little bit more about copyright and how it feels as a playwright for your stuff to be used without getting, your share of it or whatever. Elaborate on that a little bit, if you will.
Oh, yeah. Well, so there's a couple things that are interesting. So playwriting through improvisation, I want to talk about first, because that's a way that a lot of people here in Chicago are developing new work. And it's a way that a lot of really interesting screenwriters are producing new work as well. So if you look at like Joe Swanberg and the Easy series on Netflix, that's an entirely improvised show. Same with Curb Your Enthusiasm. So the writer comes up with more the concept, and then the actors play out these beats, but there's not written words on the page. And so there's been a conversation in the screenwriting and playwriting community. Well, how do you give credit to people when they contribute to the work in that way? And one solution that we found, this wasn't the case with Self Story, and it wasn't as, I didn't take the dialogue from improv verbatim and put it into the play, so that felt significantly different. But one of the solutions we found when the actors' words that they improvise actually end up in the final project is, at least in Chicago with New Works, we are crediting the original ensemble as participants who worked to develop that with the playwright. So they get a credit and a percentage of royalties in the contract. So I think the New Colony is the company that does it best here, and it's like 5% or something like that, goes to the original cast, so that in subsequent productions, those actors get credit for their ideas. And that's really important. Then as far as copywriting with Self Story went, once it was published in Dramatics, I think that maybe some smaller programs or people that just didn't really consider what it would mean to do a work by an 18-year-old student who didn't like have access to like fancy lawyers or the dramatist guild. They were like, we can just do this, we don't have to pay for it, which is not the case. So in the times that I found like photos from programs doing it, I would just reach out and I'd CC my editor at Dramatics and say like, hey, I see these photos and these posts, and like, I see you're doing my show, like, can you tell me like what your plan is here as far as compensating me, and sort of like put the ball in their court and not like accuse them like, oh, you're doing this and you need to pay me, but be like, I assume you know you need to pay me, so how are we going to do this? And most of the time they would say, well, we're so sorry. And I would say, it's fine. And I think a few times I even like waived the royalty fee, which is, you know, almost nothing for a play this length and like this small. Like for smaller programs, I would just say, you know, just do the play, just make sure that, you know, you credit me as the author and stuff like that.
All right, next question. Who's got it? Jack.
What are your views on social media today, notwithstanding to the coronavirus epidemic right now?
Yeah, so outside of the context of the coronavirus, I actually wrote my thesis at the end of college about how we physicalize the virtual space, the social media space in a theater. So I'm sure you guys have all seen plays at this point where somebody has to be in a chat room or texting and they're doing it physically on stage in front of you. And we see like on our TV shows and in our movies, I don't know if anybody saw the movie Searching, which takes place entirely like on a computer screen. It's like a dad whose kid gets lost or kidnapped or something, and you see him stalking people on Facebook and Instagram to try to find their information. So I'm really interested in how we tell stories and how we depict the virtual space of social media in a theatrical and film context. So that's, I guess, answering a slightly different question than you asked. My views on social media in general, I feel like I still am on it too much. And it's crazy, I thought I was on it too much in high school when I was on it far less. And I know that like the graphs on my iPhone keep telling me my screen time's going way up, especially during quarantine. But I think we know from studies that scientifically you're going to get a hit of dopamine when you get validation on social media. And validation can come from a like or a comment or a chat, just engaging with someone in any way. But I still feel that that is surface level. I still feel that that is not sustainable as a way to keep yourself happy and fulfilled. And I think that the people who are truly the most present, and like I'm really into Brene Brown. I don't know if you guys know about her as a writer and researcher, but she's like she's a social worker and psychologist and researcher that talks a lot about worthiness and shame, and the people that are she finds to be living the fullest lives are being vulnerable and putting themselves out there and being honest about their feelings, their perspective, their faults. And those are things we don't really do on social media. And when we do them, they're in these almost super prescriptive ways. Like I'm thinking about YouTube beauty influencers, you know, coming on in like their hoodie with no makeup and like issuing an apology. Like it's formulaic. Even the vulnerability is sort of like contrived. So I mean, there's a lot of great stuff about social media, and you know, I'm grateful for it because a lot of the work I do in my day job revolves around creating content for social media. So it's paying my bills, but I think I still believe that it can be pretty toxic, and I think that it's important to stay grounded in real reality and not necessarily think that we can have an accurate portrayal of ourselves or our relationships on those platforms.
Awesome. Cool.
Thank you.
All right. Who has a question? Selena, go for it.
Okay, so was it hard for you to like stick with one play that you wanted to be involved in as you're writing it, like to keep involving it, so that you like kept moving forward with the play instead of just like saying that's good enough?
Yeah, definitely. And it was an interesting opportunity with this play because it evolved over the course of like my sophomore year in high school to my freshman year in college. So I kept revisiting it and updating it. But like that first round, I feel like looking, like if I'm remembering correctly, I just kept moving forward on the first draft. Like there's a tendency, I think, as writers to want to go back to your previous 5 pages instead of writing the next 5. And like, oh, I'm going to move forward when I like really know that everything before this is perfect. But sometimes you don't really know what is the right thing to do in the beginning until you get to the middle. At least that's my process. And a lot of the things that happened later in the play, I went back and updated the beginning to reflect. They kind of informed the previous pages. So like you make discoveries as you're writing. you can always trash pages later. Like, and the work that you do when you're writing that maybe doesn't make it to the final product or looks really different in the final product is not wasted work, I don't think, because you're learning about the world and the characters, and it's helping you figure out the voices of these people. So like in a recent project I'm working on a screenplay for a feature film, and it's a girl who's talking with her student loan repayment person on the phone, and it's like 10 pages of dialogue. I thought it was super funny, but ultimately didn't fit into the screenplay, and I had to cut the whole thing. But the exercise of writing that scene helped me understand my protagonist's sense of humor, how she deals with authority figures, how she might manipulate someone. So those learnings that I got from doing those pages, even though they're not in the final project, are still really informative to the work.
Yeah, and I seem to also remember when we were in high school and, the director selected your play to be done for like, at West, we call it the New Works Festival. North calls it SWAP. I mean, we called it like the One Acts Festival at East. But she said that it was too long, and then you had to trim it down to like 20 minutes or something like that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, Kyle Thomas directed it. He was a friend of ours, so we went to school with. He was a senior at the time, and he was like, he was going to direct it. He picked it to direct it, and the first thing he said to me was, "I loved your play. It's too long." So yeah, we had to create the compressed version of it for that first performance.
Indeed. So, all right, who's got a next question for me? Emma Steenhart.
Oh, I didn't realize I wasn't muted. Hi. When you're writing a script, how do you decide what stories deserve to be told? Or how do you choose between two stories that you want to tell, but time or resources, etc., prevents you from writing both?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting way to put that. What stories deserve to be told, right? Because it's like, gosh, how could we ever assess that? So I don't know if that's necessarily the most productive way to think about it. I think it's, what story are you most excited about telling right now? But it also comes back to what story is actually a play or is actually a movie, because some stories are short stories or books. Some stories are short films. They're not feature films. And so you have to look at the story you want to tell. Does it have a beginning, middle, and end? Does it have a protagonist who needs to change? Does it, there's a screenwriting philosophy where you might have a character that has a thesis, right? Like Finding Nemo, like Marlin thinks safety is the most important thing, and I have to protect my son at all costs. And what he learns through the movie is that actually, you have to let people go out in the world and have experiences, and maybe staying close to home and safety is not the most important thing. He has to change. So his thesis at the beginning is different from his thesis at the end. So ask yourself, do I have a protagonist that wants to change and has a vehicle for change in this story? And I guess, yeah, are you excited about it? That's honestly what it comes down to the most for me, is like, a lot of times I'll come up with a premise, or I'll see a cool idea in my head, or I'll watch an interaction take place and think, oh, this would be a really great way to start a play or a movie. But then, can the work sustain itself beyond that one interesting hook? Is important to ask yourself. And you can be writing multiple things. I mean, I'm writing like 3 things right now. It's like ADD, you just like, I'm excited about this today, so I'm gonna work on it. If I'm not excited about this other one today, I'll go work on this other thing. If I'm not excited about anything, I'll watch a bunch of great movies,
What advice would you give to kids who are in high school, like these group of kids who are here right now? What advice, if they're interested in pursuing playwriting or getting better at it, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, so I would recommend just looking at what resources are available to you. So I think, like, if Miss Hitchler hadn't told me that this International Thespian Society thing existed, then I would never have gone to there. I never would have met Chris Diaz. Like, my whole journey with this play would have ended after I wrote it, and we did it at East. So you may not always have somebody to like put something in your lap like she did for me. So you do your own research. There's tons of play festivals all the time. And especially for young writers, like there are less people submitting when you're in high school for these smaller competitions, so you kind of have a leg up. And yeah, just write what you're interested in, write what is true for you. I think a big advantage that you have as people that are still in high school is that you have a perspective on the world that isn't voiced by the people with the loudest megaphones all the time. And so what's interesting to you is what's going to be interesting and relevant to everybody very soon. And your perspective is really valuable. So I would just focus on what's unique about your voice and the way that you see the world as you approach your writing. I don't feel like you have to be really disciplined about your writing. A lot of people say write every day. I don't write every day. I write when I feel like it. Yeah, and just look for opportunities. I would say the biggest thing is like just ask. When I was in college and working with the American Theater Company, they had a program where you would go into high schools and work with their students to develop a play with them. And I found out about that program, and there was nothing anywhere about how to submit, to work in it, or be a playwright. So I just emailed their literary manager and said, hey, like, I'm a playwright. Can I help you with this? Can I be involved? And they were enthusiastic. So ask for what you want.
Awesome. That's great. We have time for a couple more questions if someone wants to ask one. Okay, Aaliyah?
So what has it been like working in Chicago, and how have you seen your playwriting process and just writing change throughout the years since high school?
Yeah, cool. That's cool to reflect on, actually, because like in reading this play, I don't know if you guys ever go back and read like your writing from 10 years ago, but it's really different, right? So to go back and revisit this play, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm such a different writer now than I was when I wrote this play. Like process-wise, these days, I really like to have a concrete outline when I start working on something. With this play, I was really taking it day to day. Like I knew that Cher was going to like expose this virus for being fake, but I hadn't outlined like scene 1, this will happen. Scene 2, this will happen. And these days I do that. I find it more helpful to start that way. And then, yeah, I think that just having experiences beyond lived the same place my whole life. I went to school with the same people my whole life. So when I wrote this play, my worldview was kind of limited. And so I was writing characters that I had seen in other creative works and people that I knew. And having had more experiences through college and through like working and living here in Chicago, I feel like I've seen a lot more perspectives. So I feel like my work is a lot more inclusive than it was when I wrote this. And then just to answer your question about working in Chicago as a playwright, I think if you're interested in playwriting, this is definitely the place to be. There's so much new work being developed here, and there's so many opportunities to work with theater companies, from really tiny storefronts where it's 50 seats in the whole theater to like these giant big equity houses, and all of them are looking for new work and new writers. So if you want to be a writer, I do really recommend at least starting out in Chicago.
Yeah, Mr. Pence and I, as part of our grad school program, we had a residency at Steppenwolf, and so we got to see a lot of new works, like working with people who are doing like devised theater there, and seeing the new works there. So definitely check out Chicago if you're interested in playwriting, and definitely if you're interested in making new things, Chicago is a great place for that. So, all right, who else has, Selena, do you have your hand up again?
To piggyback on that before Selena's question,
okay.
Chicago has kind of been considered that playground of theater, because people can get into Chicago and they can play a whole lot more than they could in New York or LA or something along those lines. And the Chicago theatrical community is more welcoming of that play, to put play in quotes, than you have in a lot of other places. So it's a great place to be. A lot of people can get a great start in Chicago and then move from there or continue to make a name for themselves in Chicago.
Yeah, and there's even like screenwriters that are still based in Chicago too. Like Ike Holter is a big playwright. He wrote an entire series of plays about living in Chicago in a fictional neighborhood, and he wrote on Fosse Verdon this past year. He's consulting on a couple different shows. So yeah, it's definitely possible to have a career from here. And I totally agree. It's a much more experimental and welcome to new ideas atmosphere, I guess, than I've picked up on in New York and LA. And the the stakes feel a little bit lower because it's not as big of a market as New York or Los Angeles.
Great. All right, Selena, do you have a question? And then we have time for one more right after Selena.
Yeah, so I have been writing short stories that are kind of in the format of a play, and I was just wondering if you've ever written a short story and then ended up changing it into a play, or vice versa.
Yeah, I can't think that I've ever written a short story and then later turned it into a play, but I do think that that's very possible and happens. I just mentioned Ike Holter. He wrote an adaptation of a short story called Lottery Day that was recently at the Goodman. So it can work. I think you have to ask yourself the same questions that I was talking about earlier, like what are the qualities that make this a good short story? What are the qualities that would make this translate to a good play? Is there something visual that you can do on stage? I think that's also really important to the playwriting process too, as you think about it differently from screenwriting or short story writing, is like you all know, because you're in a theater class and you're probably actors and writers yourselves, like there's something really specific and immediate about sitting in a theater and watching someone perform in front of you. And I think that you have to remember that as you're doing the work of writing it too. What makes this something that needs to be performed live, and what would make this unique about seeing a living person in front of me interact in this scene versus it playing out in my head in story form.
Awesome. Dustin, did you want to take the last question? Is that why hands up?
I don't have to take the last question. If there's another student that wants it, take it. But I have a question if we don't have anybody.
Abby, go for it.
I was wondering, how do you work with like creating characters and character development when you're writing plays?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. You like it too. Great. Okay, character development. So there's a lot of things. So I was rewatching 30 Rock actually as part of my quarantine programming, and something that's really incredible about that show is it's this collection of characters whose strengths, weaknesses, wants, dislikes all perfectly play off of each other. So I think considering the ensemble is important when you construct a cast. How can you make a protagonist and an antagonist whose qualities perfectly align them to constantly like go head to head against each other again and again? I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Myers-Briggs personality types, but a lot of writers I know will figure out what their character's Myers-Briggs are, or what their character's zodiac sign is, just anything that'll help you get specific about who this person is. And then voice is huge for character development. So as you get to know your character and who they are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, what they want, what their background is, how does all that inform how they speak to each other, and not just the words they say, but the words they don't say. Who are they willing to be vulnerable in front of? Who are they gonna put up more of a shield in front of? I think about all those things when I'm developing characters. And that's where that preliminary work in the pages that might not make it into your final product come in, because you'll learn a lot about your characters by writing them into fictional situations that might not even fit into the world of your play.
That's awesome. Cool. Thank you so much, Katie, for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Yes. And so in case I wasn't clear, these are kids from all over Olathe schools, not just Olathe West. And we were really excited to be able to talk with you, and I know that these kids are excited to have something to do, hopefully, that's not just like sitting around doing nothing. But it was really fun for me to see everyone's faces and people from other school and stuff, and I feel like it's a great connection point. So thank you so much, Katie, again. It was awesome to see you since high school.
Yeah, it's great to see you. I know. I'll leave my email in the chat too. If you guys have other questions, I'm happy to email back and forth with you. And yeah, hopefully I've made sense. I haven't been talking to anyone because I've been self-isolating. So like this has been an interesting difference from that.
Yeah.
Words are hard.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much. And Katie will put her email in the chat. And then if you guys want to chat and say anything, like a thanks to her or anything like that before you head out, that would be awesome. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Is that Mr. Pence?
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh my God.
The person that Hastings talked to was a cat.
What? Oh,
Thank you.
thanks.
You're the top.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Katie. It was great.
Thanks. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Happy you're here doing well.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Alicia, for setting this up.
Yeah, for sure. It's
So
Katie's
fun.
idea, and I'm really glad that she reached out because this was really cool.
Yeah,
Yes,
this is
thank
cool.
you,
This was
Katie,
perfect
so
for this
much.
week.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I know.
So
Party with the adults. Bye, guys.
bye. Have a good
Bye.
one.
You too.
See you guys.